The Curse of the Sinclair Family. Welcome to the Ghastly Journal. Tonight we tell a story that will chill your bones. It's about the Sinclair family and their terrible curse. 12 family members died in the same way, all found dead in their bathtubs, all with strange smiles on their faces. The beginning. The story starts in 1873 in Blackmir, Massachusetts. This was a town by the ocean where rich people built big houses. The biggest house belonged to Thaddius Sinclair, a man who made lots of money from ships. His boats traveled all over the world, bringing back treasures and goods. Thaddius was mean and cold. People whispered scary stories about him. They said his ships never sank when others did. They said his business partners had accidents when they wouldn't sell to him. And they talked about the weird things he brought back from faraway places. The strangest thing was in his house. Right when you walked in, there was a big black stone bowl. Thaddius said he got it from an island in the Pacific Ocean. The bowl was carved with pictures of people with long arms and big smiles, all underwater. Thaddius told everyone the island people worshipped a water god they called the Smiling One. He said this god gave good luck to people who honored it, but took the souls of people who didn't. Everyone who came to his house had to touch the water in the bowl before they could come inside. "For good luck," he would say, but his smile never looked real. The first death. In winter 1878, something terrible happened. Thaddius's oldest son, Edmund, found his father dead in the bathtub. Thaddius was under the water up to his neck, and his face had a peaceful smile that looked very wrong on the stern old man. Dr. Henry Abernathy said it was an accident. Mr. Sinclair fell asleep in the bath and slipped under the water. The smile is just what happens when muscles relax after death. But Edmund didn't believe it. His father was always careful around water. Even though he owned ships, Thaddius couldn't swim and was scared of drowning. Why would he take such a deep bath and fall asleep in it? Life went on for the Sinclair family. Edmund took over the business and made it even bigger. He married Victoria Wells, a rich woman from Boston. They had 3 children, twins named Abigail and Alexander, and a younger son named William. Thaddius's other son, Theodore, ran the family's houses and land. He was married to Eleanor, and they had 4 children: Catherine, James, Elizabeth, and Thomas. The family got richer and richer, but Edmund never forgot how his father died. He kept the strange black bowl in the front hall, making guests touch its water like his father did. But he stayed away from it himself. More deaths begin. 10 years passed quietly. Then in spring 1888, tragedy came back. Catherine, Theodore's oldest daughter, was found dead in her bathtub by her maid. Just like her grandfather, she was under the water with that same peaceful, wrong-looking smile. Catherine was only 20 years old. She was planning to marry a judge's son and was very happy about it. There was no reason for her to hurt herself, and she hadn't seemed sad or worried about anything. Dr. Abernathy looked at her body and said it was another accident. The young lady probably fainted in the hot water. Very sad, but these things happen. But now 2 people in the same family had drowned the same way with the same strange smile. People in town started to whisper about a Sinclair curse. They were careful not to say it where the family could hear, but the talk was there. Edmund became very worried. He started trying to learn about the black stone bowl his father had brought home. He wrote letters to smart people who knew about old artifacts and strange objects. Most people didn't write back, or they said they didn't know anything. But one letter came back from Professor Marlowe at Miskatonic University. It was short but scary. "Dear Mr. Sinclair, the thing you describe sounds like something made by people who lived on islands that are now under the ocean. The cult that made these bowls worshipped something they believed lived in the deep sea. They thought this thing needed people to sacrifice themselves to keep it from rising up and taking everyone. The worst part of their rituals was that people would drown themselves on purpose. They believed they would join the sea creature in a perfect underwater world. History says that the faces of these sacrificed people always looked happy and peaceful. I strongly tell you to get rid of this thing and lock it away. Some objects carry more than just their history. Be careful." Professor J. Marlowe. Edmund thought this was silly superstition. He was a modern, educated man of the late 1800s. There were no ancient curses or sea monsters, just sad coincidences and accidents. But then, just 3 months later, James was found dead. He was Theodore's second child and only son, just 17 years old and getting ready to go to Harvard. Same bathtub, same smile, same death. This time the whispers got much louder. 3 drownings with the same expression couldn't be just luck. The local newspaper ran a big story. Tragedy strikes Sinclair family again. Curse or coincidence? Edmund was furious about the curse talk and threatened to sue the newspaper. The editor printed an apology, but it was too late. People started avoiding the Sinclair family. Business partners made excuses not to visit the house. Even their servants quit their jobs. The seance. Theodore was destroyed by losing 2 of his children in less than a year. He turned to spiritual mediums for comfort. Even though Edmund said no, Theodore brought a medium named Madame Levesque to the house to try to talk to his dead children. The seance happened in the big drawing room on a stormy October night in 1888. Theodore and Eleanor were there with their 2 living children, Elizabeth and Thomas. Edmund came with Victoria and their 3 children. Some trusted servants watched too, including Mrs. Harrington, who had worked for the family for 20 years. Mrs. Harrington later told the police what happened. The seance started normally. Madame Levesque asked everyone to hold hands around a big table while she tried to contact the dead. The room was dark except for candles, and everyone felt scared and sad. "I sense someone here," the medium said after a few quiet minutes. "A young woman and a young man. They are together. They are wet. Water drips from their clothes and hair." Eleanor started crying softly. "They have a message," the medium continued, her voice getting strange, like she was talking from underwater. "They say they are not alone. They are with grandfather and others. Many others, all smiling, all waiting." Then Mrs. Harrington said, all the candles flickered at the same time. A cold wind blew through the closed room. The water in a glass on the table started making little waves, even though nobody touched it. "They say," the medium's voice changed completely, becoming deep and scary. "The basin calls. The debt must be paid. 12 shall smile for the smiling one." After saying this, Madame Levesque started shaking violently. Water poured out of her mouth, soaking the table. She fell down and everyone had to help wake her up. When she came to, she couldn't remember what she had said. She ran away from the house, refusing to take any money and promising never to come back. Edmund said the seance was fake nonsense, someone taking advantage of his brother's grief. He forbade anyone from talking about curses, mediums, or supernatural things in his house. But the stone basin stayed in the front hall, its water still and dark, reflecting nothing. Winter brings more death. Winter came to Blackmir with heavy snow and harsh winds. The Sinclair family stayed away from other people, focusing on their business and trying to ignore the gossip still going around town. For a few months, things seemed to get better. Then, in February 1889, Eleanor found Elizabeth in her bathtub. Theodore's 3rd child was just 16 years old. Like her brothers and grandfather before her, she lay under the water with that peaceful, terrible smile, her long hair floating around her like seaweed. Now it was clear something was very wrong. 4 Sinclair family members had died exactly the same way over 11 years. All found in bathtubs, all smiling. The town of Blackmir was filled with fear and fascination. Some people said they saw strange lights in the Sinclair mansion at night. Fishermen heard weird singing coming from the cliffs near the house. Children dared each other to touch the gates of the estate, then run away before the curse could get them. Theodore fell into deep sadness after losing 3 of his 4 children. His wife Eleanor rarely left her room, taking strong medicine to help with her grief. Their last child, Thomas, was sent to live with relatives in New York, far from Blackmir and its dark connections. Edmund finally started to think there might be more than just bad luck happening. He remembered Professor Marlowe's letter and decided to learn more about the stone basin that had been in their front hall for so many years. The hidden journal. In his father's study, Edmund found a secret compartment in the old sea captain's desk. Inside was a leather journal, its pages yellow and stiff with salt air. It was his father's private log of trips not recorded in the official company books. The last entry, dated just weeks before Thaddius died, told a disturbing story. November 10th, 1878. We came back from the island with the artifact safely stored. The native people didn't want to give it up, even for all the money I offered. The tribal elder, a man so old I couldn't guess his age, warned me that the basin carried a pact with their god, the one who smiles in the deep. 12 souls, he told me through my interpreter. 12 souls over 3 generations, freely given in water with joy in their hearts. This is the price for prosperity. If you take the basin, you take the pact. I thought his warnings were primitive superstition, but Matthews insisted we respect their customs. To make everyone happy, I did their ritual, put my hands in the basin's water, and spoke the words they taught me. Meaningless sounds, of course, but it satisfied them, and we left with the basin. Since we got back, I've had strange dreams of deep water and distant singing. In these dreams, I'm underwater but can breathe freely, and it feels wonderful. I find myself drawn to the basin, to its waters that never seem to get less no matter how much should evaporate. Most disturbing, Matthews was found dead yesterday in his room on the Prosperity. The ship's doctor says he appears to have drowned, though there was barely an inch of water in the wash basin near where he was found. They say his face looked perfectly content. I'm starting to wonder if there was more truth to the elder's words than I first believed. If so, I have brought something terrible to my family. May God forgive me. Edmund was shaken by his father's words. The mention of 12 souls over 3 generations matched what Madame Levesque had said. 12 shall smile for the smiling one. For family members were already dead. Who would be next? Trying to break the curse, Edmund decided to destroy the basin. That night, he took a big hammer from the tool shed and went to the ancient artifact. As he raised the hammer to smash the stone, he suddenly felt a strong urge to touch the water's surface. Edmund fought against this feeling, but it got stronger every second. His arms shook with the effort of holding up the hammer. Sweat dripped down his face even though the air was cool. Just one touch, his mind whispered, just to see what father felt. With a loud cry of defiance, Edmund brought the hammer down on the basin. The stone cracked with a sound like thunder, and water spilled across the marble floor. The water moved in streams that seemed to have purpose rather than just flowing naturally. Edmund stepped back, breathing hard, watching as all the water emptied from the basin for the first time in over 10 years. The crack in the stone showed something hidden inside the base, a small object wrapped in wet silk. With shaking hands, Edmund unwrapped the mysterious item. It was a coral figurine no bigger than his palm. It showed a human-like creature with a long head and a wide, too-perfect smile. Its arms were stretched out as if welcoming someone. Even though it had been underwater for years, the figurine felt dry and strangely warm. As Edmund looked at the strange object, a soft voice spoke behind him. "Father, what are you doing?" Edmund turned to see his daughter Abigail standing on the stairs in her nightgown, her long hair loose around her shoulders. At 20 years old, she looked just like her mother, with the same delicate features and questioning eyes. "Nothing you need to worry about, my dear," Edmund replied quickly, hiding the figurine in his jacket pocket. "Go back to bed." Abigail hesitated, looking at the broken basin. "You broke grandfather's basin." "It was time," Edmund said firmly. "That thing has brought nothing but bad luck to this family." "But the water," Abigail whispered, her eyes following something on the floor. "It's going upstairs." Edmund looked down in horror. The water from the basin had formed a thin stream that was flowing up the staircase, defying all natural laws. As they watched, it disappeared around the corner at the top of the stairs, heading toward the family bedrooms. Alexander in danger. Filled with sudden fear, Edmund rushed up the stairs, following the water trail. It led directly to his son Alexander's bedroom. Edmund burst through the door to find Alexander's bed empty, the covers thrown back as if he had just gotten up. The water trail continued into Alexander's private bathroom. Edmund pushed open the door to see his son standing beside the full bathtub, his eyes blank and unfocused. Alexander's nightshirt was soaked, though there was no sign of splashing anywhere. "Alexander!" Edmund cried, rushing forward to grab his son's arm. "Step away from there." Alexander turned slowly, his movements dreamlike. "Father," he said, his voice distant. "I heard it calling, the singing under the water. It's beautiful." "There is no singing," Edmund insisted, pulling his son away from the bathtub. "Whatever you think you hear, it's not real. It's some kind of influence." Alexander's face stayed calm, almost happy. "The one who smiles in the deep is waiting for us. For all of us. 12 smiles, Father. That was the promise." Edmund felt a chill run through him. "Who told you about that? Did you read my father's journal?" "No one told me," Alexander replied. "I've always known, since I was a child, since grandfather brought it home." His eyes drifted back to the bathtub. "The water feels like home." Edmund gripped his son's shoulders tightly. "Listen to me. Your grandfather made a terrible mistake. He brought back something he shouldn't have. But we don't have to continue this pact. We can end it now." For a moment, Alexander seemed to come back to himself, confusion replacing the dreamy look in his eyes. "Father, what's happening? Why am I wet?" Relief washed over Edmund. "It's all right, son. You were sleepwalking. Come, let's get you dried off and back to bed." As Edmund turned to get a towel, Alexander moved with surprising speed. Before his father could react, the young man lunged toward the bathtub and plunged headfirst into the water. Edmund shouted and grabbed for his son, managing to catch hold of his nightshirt. He pulled with all his strength, dragging Alexander's upper body out of the water. The young man struggled wildly, trying to force himself back under the surface. "Let me go!" Alexander cried, his voice full of anger and desperation. "It's calling me. I have to answer." Edmund held tight, calling for help. Abigail appeared in the doorway, her face pale with shock. "Get your mother," Edmund shouted to her, "and tell Reynolds to bring rope." As Abigail ran away, Alexander suddenly went limp in his father's grip. Edmund pulled him completely out of the water and laid him on the bathroom floor. Alexander's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. "Alexander, can you hear me?" Edmund asked, bending over his son. Alexander's eyes snapped open, but they weren't the familiar eyes Edmund knew. They seemed darker, deeper, like looking into bottomless water. A smile spread across the young man's face, the same peaceful, knowing smile that had marked the faces of the 4 dead Sinclairs. "The basin is broken," Alexander said, his voice strangely echoing in the small bathroom. "But the pact remains. 12 smiles. 8 more to go." Then he blinked and his eyes were normal again. He looked around in confusion. "Father, why am I on the floor? Why am I all wet?" Edmund's plan. Edmund had Alexander moved to a bedroom without a bathtub and posted Reynolds, his most trusted servant, outside the door. He ordered all bathtubs in the house to be drained and told the staff that no one could bathe until further notice. Sponge baths only, with very little water, and always with someone watching. That night, Edmund studied his father's journal more carefully, looking for any clue about how to break the pact with the entity his father had called the one who smiles in the deep. The journal mentioned the island where the basin came from, giving coordinates that Edmund carefully wrote down. In the morning, Edmund made a decision. He would travel to the island himself and find out how to end this curse before it claimed more of his family. He arranged for Victoria and their children to stay with her sister in Philadelphia while he was gone, far from Blackmir and its dark influences. Theodore and Eleanor would go with them, along with Thomas, who would be brought from New York. Only by keeping the family separated and away from large bodies of water could Edmund ensure their safety until he returned. 2 weeks later, Edmund stood on the deck of the Defiance, one of the Sinclair Line's fastest ships. The coral figurine was locked in a lead box in his cabin. He had thought about leaving it behind, but was afraid of what might happen if it stayed in Blackmir. The voyage would take several months, following the route detailed in his father's logbooks. As the ship pulled away from the harbor, Edmund saw a familiar figure on the docks. His daughter Abigail, who should have been safely on her way to Philadelphia with the rest of the family. She stood still among the busy crowd, staring at the departing ship. Though she was too far away for Edmund to see her face clearly, he was filled with the terrible certainty that she was smiling. The troubled journey. Edmund's journey was full of problems from the start. Strange storms chased the Defiance across the Atlantic, causing delays and damage to the ship. Crew members reported weird dreams of drowning that left them feeling strangely refreshed and happy. The ship's cook was found trying to climb over the railing one night, saying he heard singing in the waves. Most disturbing of all, Edmund discovered that the lead box in his cabin was now filled with seawater, even though it remained tightly sealed. The coral figurine floated inside, its eternal smile seeming to mock his efforts. After nearly 4 months at sea, the Defiance finally reached the coordinates noted in Thaddius Sinclair's journal. The island was small and plain-looking, a crescent of black volcanic sand surrounding a thick jungle interior. No signs of people were visible from the ship. Edmund led a landing party of 6 men, including the ship's doctor and a translator who knew several Pacific languages. As their rowboat approached the shore, Edmund noticed that the water around the island was unusually clear, allowing him to see straight to the bottom despite the depth. At first, the island seemed deserted. The landing party made their way inland, following what looked like an old path overgrown with plants. After an hour's walk, they came to a clearing containing the ruins of a stone village. The structures were built like the basin that had been in the Sinclair front hall, made from the same black volcanic stone with the same swirling patterns carved into their surfaces. At the center of the village stood a larger building, a temple or meeting hall. Its entrance was flanked by statues of tall human figures with wide, ecstatic smiles. Meeting the island elders. As the party approached the temple, they were suddenly surrounded by island natives who seemed to appear from the jungle. The islanders were tall and thin with elaborate tattoos of waves and sea life covering much of their bodies. They carried no weapons but formed a circle around the landing party, preventing them from either approaching the temple or retreating to the shore. The translator tried to communicate but said the language the islanders spoke was unlike any he had encountered. After several tense minutes, an elderly woman came out of the temple. Unlike the others, her skin had no tattoos, but her eyes were clouded with cataracts that gave them a milky, otherworldly appearance. To everyone's surprise, she spoke directly to Edmund in perfect, though old-fashioned, English. "The son returns where the father trespassed," she said, her voice strong despite her apparent age. "You carry the smile of the Deep One with you. We feel its presence." Edmund stepped forward. "My father took something from this island many years ago, a stone basin and a coral figurine. He didn't understand what he was taking." The old woman nodded slowly. "He understood. We warned him of the pact. 12 souls freely given in water with joy in their hearts. This is the price for prosperity. For members of my family have already died," Edmund said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I've come to end this pact before more lives are lost." The old woman tilted her head, studying Edmund with her sightless eyes. "The pact cannot be broken once accepted, but it can be redirected." The old woman explained that the entity they worshipped, the one who smiles in the deep, required regular sacrifices to stay dormant in the ocean depths. If these sacrifices were not provided, the entity would eventually rise and claim far more lives than the 12 specified in the pact. "Your father accepted prosperity in exchange for sacrifice," she said. "His ships never sank in storms. His business flourished where others failed. Even now, your family's wealth grows while others suffer in recent financial panics. This is the blessing of the Deep One." "I want no part of such a blessing," Edmund declared. "Take back your figurine. Take back the pact." The old woman shook her head. "The pact is bound to your bloodline now. It cannot be returned to us, but it can be transferred to another bloodline if one is willing to accept it." Edmund considered this. And how would such a transfer be accomplished? "A new vessel must be created," the old woman replied. "A new basin carved from the stone of this island. The figurine must be placed within it." And then, she hesitated. "Then one who shares your blood must voluntarily surrender to the waters, accepting the role of messenger between your family and the Deep One. Edmund recoiled at the suggestion. You're asking me to sacrifice one of my family members to save the others? I ask nothing, the old woman said calmly. I merely tell you what is possible. The choice is yours, as it was your father's. The return home. Edmund returned to the Defiance with a block of the black volcanic stone obtained with the islanders' help. During the voyage home, he spent hours each day carving it into a basin identical to the one his father had brought back decades earlier. The work was painstaking, but it gave him time to think and plan. The old woman's words haunted him. A voluntary sacrifice, someone who shared his blood. There was only one possible choice, though it tore at his heart even to consider it. The return journey was as troubled as the outward voyage. Storms and unusual currents delayed their progress. 2 crewmen disappeared without a trace during a particularly violent squall, though no one had seen them go overboard. The drinking water in the ship's barrels became inexplicably salty overnight, forcing them to stop at a small port for fresh supplies. Throughout it all, Edmund worked on the basin, carving the intricate patterns that would link it to the entity dwelling in the deep. When the work was finally complete, he placed the coral figurine inside and filled it with seawater collected from the waters around the island. After nearly 9 months away, Edmund Sinclair returned to Blackmir in the winter of 1890. The town seemed changed somehow, though he couldn't immediately identify how. There were fewer fishing boats in the harbor. Many storefronts on the main street were boarded up. The people moved with tired haste, keeping their eyes down and hurrying about their business. As Edmund's carriage made its way up the hill toward the Sinclair mansion, he noticed that many of the neighboring estates appeared abandoned. Gardens were overgrown, windows were dark, and in some cases, furniture had been removed, leaving empty rooms visible from the road. The Sinclair mansion itself stood as imposing as ever, but Edmund was troubled to see lights burning in windows that should have been dark. Victoria and the children were supposed to be in Philadelphia. Had they returned early? The final horror. Edmund paid the driver and approached the front door with fear. The newly carved basin was carefully wrapped and tucked under his arm. He used his key to enter, calling out as he stepped into the front hall. "Hello, Reynolds? Is anyone home?" His voice echoed in the vast entrance hall. No servants came running to take his coat or luggage. The house smelled musty, as if it had been closed up for too long without proper airing. Edmund made his way to the study, still calling for Reynolds or any other staff member. He set the wrapped basin on his desk and moved through the house, checking rooms as he went. Everything was in its place, but there was a film of dust on the furniture, and the fireplaces were cold and empty. In the kitchen, Edmund found evidence of recent meals, dirty dishes in the sink, food scraps on the cutting board, but there was no sign of the cook or any of the kitchen staff. As Edmund climbed the stairs to the second floor, he heard a faint sound coming from down the hallway, the gentle splashing of water. His heart began to race as he followed the sound to its source, the master bathroom that adjoined his and Victoria's bedroom. The door was slightly open, a sliver of light spilling into the darkened hallway. Edmund approached slowly, dread building with each step. He pushed the door open to reveal Victoria sitting in the full bathtub, fully clothed in one of her finest dresses, her hair elaborately styled as if for a social event. "Victoria," Edmund whispered, his voice catching in his throat. His wife turned to look at him, her movements slow and dreamlike. Her eyes, once warm and expressive, now had the same bottomless depth that he had seen in Alexander's eyes during that terrible night before his departure. "Edmund," she said, her voice eerily calm, "you've returned at last. We've been waiting for you." "We?" Edmund asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. Victoria smiled, that same peaceful, knowing smile. "All of us. The children, Theodore and Eleanor, even the servants who stayed. We've all heard the singing. We've all felt the joy." Edmund stepped backward, gripping the doorframe for support. "Where are they, Victoria? Where are our children?" "With the Deep One," Victoria replied, running her hands through the bathwater. "Alexander went first after you left. He was so happy, Edmund. You should have seen his smile. Then William a month later. Reynolds tried to stop him. Poor man. He joined us the next day. Edmund felt as if the floor were tilting beneath him. And Abigail? I saw her at the docks when I left. Victoria's smile widened. Clever Abigail. She knew you would try to separate us from the water. She followed you to the docks but came back here afterward. She waited the longest until last week. And Theodore? Eleanor? Thomas? Edmund's voice was barely audible. All smiling now, Victoria confirmed, her expression one of blissful contentment. All at peace beneath the waters. 10 smiles for the deep one. Only 2 remain. The final bargain. Edmund backed out of the bathroom, his mind racing. 10 deaths. According to the pact, 12 souls were required. Victoria was clearly under the influence of whatever entity had claimed his family, which meant he was the final sacrifice needed to complete the pact. He ran down the stairs, nearly falling in his haste. In the study, he unwrapped the basin he had carved during the long voyage home. The coral figurine floated in the center, turning slowly in the water as if alive. Edmund had formulated a plan during his journey back from the island. The old woman had said the pact could be transferred to another bloodline. He had intended to find someone willing to accept it in exchange for the considerable wealth the Sinclair family had accumulated, perhaps a business rival desperate enough for success to accept the terms. But now, with 10 family members already claimed, there was no time for such arrangements. There was only one solution left. Edmund took a small knife from his desk drawer and pricked his finger, allowing several drops of blood to fall into the water of the basin. I am the last male Sinclair, he said aloud. My blood carries the pact. With this offering, I bind myself to you, Deep One, but on new terms. He didn't know if the entity could hear him or if his words meant anything at all, but he continued nonetheless. I will be your final sacrifice, freely given. But in exchange, you must release my wife from your influence. Let her live out her natural life in peace, free from the call of your waters. The water in the basin began to ripple, though Edmund had not touched it. The coral figurine spun faster, creating a small whirlpool that seemed to glow with an inner light. Edmund felt a presence in the room, an ancient, vast intelligence regarding him with curiosity. A voice that was not a voice spoke directly into his mind. The pact requires 12. 11 have smiled for me. You offer yourself as the 12th. Yes, Edmund replied aloud. Me, not Victoria. Release her, and I will come to you willingly, with joy in my heart. There was a long silence during which Edmund felt as if he were being weighed and assessed. Finally, the presence responded. Your terms are accepted, Edmund Sinclair. Your wife shall be released. But know this, the prosperity that came with the pact shall also end. The Sinclair fortune will dwindle. The Sinclair name will fade from memory. This is the price of your sacrifice. Edmund thought of the empty estates he had passed on his way to the mansion, of the boarded-up shops in town. The prosperity his father had purchased had come at a terrible cost, not just to their family, but to the entire community of Blackmir. Let it be so, he said firmly. I accept the terms. The final sacrifice. The water in the basin surged upward, defying gravity to form a column that reached toward the ceiling. Within the liquid column, Edmund saw visions of deep ocean trenches, of ancient cities submerged beneath the waves, of countless faces bearing that same beatific smile. The coral figurine dissolved into the water, becoming part of the swirling mass. From upstairs came a cry of confusion and distress. Victoria, released from the entity's influence, was suddenly aware of her surroundings. Edmund could hear her calling his name, her footsteps hurrying down the stairs. It is time, the presence communicated. Come to the waters, Edmund Sinclair. Smile for the deep one. Edmund felt an overwhelming compulsion to move toward the basin, to submerge himself in its waters despite their impossibly small volume. He fought against it, determined to say goodbye to Victoria first. She appeared in the doorway of the study, soaking wet and wild-eyed. Edmund, what's happening? I was in the bathtub, but I don't remember. The children, Edmund, where are our children? Edmund wanted to go to her, to hold her one last time, but his body was no longer his own to command. He was being drawn inexorably toward the basin, his movements jerky and unnatural. "They're gone, Victoria," he managed to say, his voice strained with the effort of fighting the compulsion. "Everyone is gone. I made a bargain to save you." Victoria rushed forward, trying to pull him away from the basin. "What bargain? Edmund, stop this. Come away from there. Listen to me," Edmund said urgently, feeling his resistance weakening with each passing moment. "You must leave Blackmir. Take whatever money is in the safe and go far away from here. Start a new life under a new name. Never speak of the Sinclairs again. Never seek out our fortune. It's tainted." "I don't understand," Victoria sobbed, still trying to drag him backward. "Please, Edmund, you're frightening me." Edmund felt his hand reach out of its own accord, fingers stretching toward the impossible column of water rising from the basin. "I love you, Victoria. I always have. Remember that. And forgive me for what my father brought upon us all." His fingertips touched the water, and in that instant, Edmund Sinclair felt a rush of ecstasy unlike anything he had ever experienced. Joy flooded through him, washing away fear, doubt, and grief. He understood now why the others had smiled as they drowned. This wasn't death, it was transcendence. Victoria watched in horror as her husband was drawn into the column of water, his body somehow fitting into the impossible space. The water engulfed him completely, and for a brief moment she could see him suspended within, his eyes closed and a smile of perfect peace on his lips. Then the column collapsed, water splashing back into the basin and onto the floor around it. Edmund was gone. Victoria fell to her knees, weeping uncontrollably. When she finally looked up, the basin was empty and dry, as if it had never contained water at all. A fine crack ran down its center, and as she watched, the crack widened until the basin split in two, crumbling into dust that scattered across the study floor. The aftermath. In the days that followed, Victoria Sinclair did as her husband had instructed. She took what money remained in the house safe, a surprisingly modest sum for a family once counted among New England's wealthiest, and departed Blackmir, never to return. The Sinclair mansion stood empty for many years afterward. No one was willing to purchase it, despite the increasingly low asking price. Eventually, it was abandoned to the elements, its once grand facade crumbling, its gardens reclaimed by the wild coastal vegetation. The shipping company that had been the source of the Sinclair fortune collapsed within a year of Edmund's disappearance. The fleet of vessels was sold off piece by piece to cover mounting debts. The railroad interests followed soon after, and then the real estate holdings. The Sinclair name, once synonymous with wealth and influence, faded from the memories of all but the oldest residents of Blackmir. Some say that on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the tide is high, strange lights can be seen moving in the ruins of the Sinclair mansion. Locals speak of eerie singing carried on the sea breeze, of shadowy figures walking the cliffs above the ocean. Fishermen avoid the waters directly below the estate, claiming their nets come up empty there, or worse, containing things that should not exist in the Atlantic or any earthly ocean. One old fisherman swears he once glimpsed a face beneath the waves. A man's face with aristocratic features and a smile of such perfect contentment that the fisherman was tempted to join him beneath the surface. Of Victoria Sinclair, little is known. Some records suggest she moved to California and remarried under her maiden name. Others indicate she may have gone to Europe. All agree that she never spoke of her former life or the tragedy that claimed her entire family. The story of the Sinclair drownings became a whispered legend in Blackmir, a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking prosperity without questioning its source. Parents warned their children not to linger near bathtubs, to never smile while submerged in water, and above all to be wary of singing that seemed to come from beneath the waves. 12 Sinclairs spanning 3 generations. 12 drownings in bathtubs. 12 peaceful smiles. The pact was fulfilled. The price for prosperity paid in full. The legacy continues. But some pacts are never truly ended. Some entities never forget the taste of a bloodline. And sometimes, generations later, a distant descendant of the Sinclairs might find themselves inexplicably drawn to water, hearing a faint, beautiful singing that no one else can perceive. People who study strange things tried to trace the family trees of later victims. A few claim to have found distant connections to the Sinclair line, cousins many times removed, descendants of children born outside marriage, families whose names were changed through marriage or deliberate hiding. The bloodline, it seems, was more extensive than Edmund ever realized. In 1968, the remains of the Sinclair mansion were torn down to make way for a coastal highway. During the digging, workers discovered a hidden room beneath what had been the front hall. Inside was a collection of personal things that had apparently belonged to Thaddius Sinclair. Navigation instruments, logbooks, and most disturbingly, a series of small coral figurines similar to the one Edmund had found hidden in the basin. Each figurine showed the same long figure with its wide smile, but in different poses. One held what appeared to be a human baby in its outstretched arms. Another stood on top of a pile of human-shaped forms. A third had multiple arms, each grasping what looked like a human heart. The contractor in charge of the digging insisted that the figurines be buried beneath the highway foundation. 3 days after handling them, he was found dead in the bathtub of his hotel room. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but the maid who discovered him noted in her statement that he had been smiling like he'd seen heaven. The Blackmir Historical Society maintains a small exhibit about the Sinclair family in the town's modest museum. It focuses primarily on their contributions to the region's economy in the late 19th century, with only a brief mention of the tragic series of accidents that befell the family. No photographs of the coral figurines are displayed, though there is a sketch of the stone basin that once stood in the mansion's front hall. Visitors occasionally report that the sketch seems to shimmer if viewed from certain angles, as if the surface depicted is not stone, but water. The curator dismisses these claims as tricks of the light. In 2010, a marine archaeology expedition mapping shipwrecks off the Massachusetts coast reported an unusual discovery near where the Sinclair mansion had once stood. Using sonar imaging, they detected what appeared to be the ruins of a stone structure on the ocean floor, nearly half a mile offshore and at a depth of 300 feet. Initial photographs showed a complex of buildings reminiscent of a small village, with architecture unlike anything known to have existed in pre-colonial North America. The expedition's subsequent funding was unexpectedly canceled, and no further investigation has been conducted. The lead archaeologist disappeared 3 months later while on vacation in the Bahamas. He had gone for a late-night swim and never returned to shore. His journal, recovered from his hotel room, contained several pages of writing in an unidentified language, followed by a single sentence in English. "The singing grows louder the deeper you go. Elizabeth Wells, A New Generation." In the summer of 1927, a young woman arrived in Blackmir, claiming to be researching her family history. She gave her name as Elizabeth Wells, the same surname as Victoria Sinclair's maiden name. She was in her early 20s, stylishly dressed, with an air of quiet determination. She took a room at the only remaining boarding house in town and spent her days examining old records and interviewing elderly residents. Mrs. Harriet Peterson, the town librarian who assisted the young woman with her research, later recalled that Miss Wells had been particularly interested in the Sinclair family and their connection to the sea. She asked such specific questions, Mrs. Peterson recounted, about bathtubs of all things, and whether any of the Sinclair descendants had ever returned to Blackmir. She seemed especially concerned about something called the Smiling One. After 2 weeks of research, Elizabeth Wells hired a local fisherman to take her out on his boat. She requested to be brought to the waters directly beneath the cliffs where the Sinclair mansion had stood. The fisherman, an old man named Tobias Green, initially refused, citing the superstitious dread that all local sailors had of that area. But Miss Wells offered him a sum he couldn't refuse, and they set out at dawn the following day. According to Green's subsequent statement to the sheriff, they had just reached the waters beneath the Sinclair cliffs when Miss Wells became agitated. "She stood up suddenly, nearly capsizing us," Green reported. "She was staring into the water, smiling like she'd seen something wonderful. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, 'I can hear them singing. They're all there. They're waiting for me.'" Before Green could stop her, the young woman dove overboard. Green immediately threw out a life preserver and tried to maneuver his boat to where she had gone under, but she never resurfaced. The Coast Guard was called in and a search was conducted for 3 days, but no body was ever recovered. Among Elizabeth Wells's possessions left at the boarding house was a journal. Its final entry read, "I found them at last. I knew the dreams meant something. The calling in the water wasn't my imagination. Great-grandmother Victoria tried to hide the truth from us, changing our name, moving across the country, but water always finds its way home. Tomorrow I will join my true family beneath the waves. The 13th smile for the one who smiles in the deep." A genealogist later confirmed that Elizabeth Wells was indeed Victoria Sinclair's great-granddaughter, born to Victoria's daughter from her second marriage. The daughter who had been conceived just weeks before Edmund Sinclair's final sacrifice. A daughter who carried the Sinclair bloodline unknown to Edmund or the entity with whom he had made his final bargain. The pact, it seemed, had found a loophole. 12 souls had been claimed as promised, but the bloodline lived on, carrying the connection to the one who smiles in the deep forward into a new generation. The modern legacy. In the decades since Elizabeth Wells's disappearance, there have been occasional reports from across the country, indeed, from around the world, of similar incidents. Individuals with no apparent connection to one another, all found drowned in bathtubs with peaceful smiles on their faces. Some leave behind journals or letters mentioning beautiful singing or dreams of deep water where they can breathe freely. Paranormal researchers have attempted to trace these victims' family trees, and a few claim to have found distant connections to the Sinclair line. The bloodline has spread far and wide over the generations. 12 relatives found drowned, all in bathtubs, all smiling. The old saying goes that water always finds its way, carves through mountains, shapes continents, and ultimately claims what belongs to it. For the Sinclair family, water became both their legacy and their curse. And so the legend of the Sinclair family continues to grow, whispered among those who study the paranormal, debated on internet forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries, dismissed by skeptics as nothing more than a series of coincidences embellished over time into a ghost story. But in Blackmir, where the ruins of a once prosperous town still cling to the rocky coastline, the locals know better. They keep their bathtubs shallow. They never smile while submerged in water. And if they hear singing coming from the ocean on dark, moonless nights, they close their windows and turn up their radios, pretending it's just the wind. Because they know the truth that Edmund Sinclair learned too late. Some prices are too high, no matter what prosperity they bring. And some entities are patient enough to wait generations for the debts they are owed. The one who smiles in the deep is still out there beneath the waves, still collecting its smiles, still calling to those who carry the Sinclair blood, whether they know their heritage or not. Water always finds its way, and so does the bloodline. So if you find yourself inexplicably drawn to large bodies of water, if you dream of breathing beneath the waves, if you sometimes think you hear beautiful singing coming from your bathtub drain, perhaps you should research your family tree. You might be surprised at what branches you find stretching back to a certain coastal town in Massachusetts, to a shipping magnate who made a terrible bargain in 1878. And if you do discover such a connection, be wary of taking baths. Showers are much safer. After all, it's harder to submerge yourself completely. Harder to answer when the one who smiles in the deep calls your name. Harder, but not impossible. For the call of blood and water combined is powerful indeed. Just ask the Sinclairs, or rather, ask the water where they now dwell, eternally smiling. Since that terrible winter of 1890, the town of Blackmir itself has never truly recovered. What was once a thriving coastal community became a shadow of its former self. The prosperity that the Sinclair family had brought, or perhaps that had been brought through them, vanished as completely as Edmund himself. In 1902, a fire swept through the abandoned Sinclair mansion, reducing much of it to charred rubble. Strangely, witnesses reported that the flames seemed to hiss and steam as if fighting against water, though it was a clear night with no rain. The stone portions of the house remained, blackened but intact, like the skeletal ribs of some massive creature. For decades, the ruins stood untouched, Developers who attempted to purchase the property for new construction invariably abandoned their plans after experiencing what they described as unsettling dreams or an overwhelming sense of dread. The local historical society's efforts to preserve the site as a landmark were similarly short-lived when their chairman was found drowned in his bathtub, with what the newspaper carefully described as a peaceful expression. The one who smiles in the deep is patient, can wait, and somewhere in the world, perhaps a bathtub is filling, its water calling to one who does not yet know their heritage or the legacy that flows through their veins. After all, water always finds its way.